And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Taylor, sorry, Neff, may I say something? Do you know what free radicals are?
Yeah.
Okay, where do we find it? In the nucleus or in the mitochondria?
I think you'll find more of them in the mitochondria.
Yes. So if our nuclear DNA is in the mitochondria, you think it will survive? Our nuclear DNA, not the mtDNA.
Probably not.
Okay. So
I'm not sure.
Doesn't it look designed that somebody put it somewhere else in a safer location, the nuclear DNA, because it will be compromised in the mitochondria? Isn't that a design feature?
No, because we understand that there are processes that randomize forms, and the forms that don't work die off. So you'll never see a form that has its DNA in a place where it gets degraded, because it would die and it would never reproduce.
Oh, please explain how both of them got sorted out. Empirical evidence.
That would be a question of abiogenesis.
No, it's design. You cannot always disguise evidence of design as something you do not address in literature. I have seen
design
this.
Design is a theory of abiogenesis.
What?
Design is a theory of abiogenesis. It's how biological material came from non-biological material, whether you think God did it or it happened naturally.
Wait a second. You are talking like you're atheistic evolution right now. Are you atheistic evolution?
No, he's just denying that intelligence is required for design, which is false.
What about the chaperone protein? How did it evolve? About abiogenesis again? How did it learn how to fold and unfold proteins? And there is even a limit on how proteins can change when it enters the chaperone. How did it learn how to do that? Because if the changes are unlimited, it would be disastrous. How did it learn how to do that?
Because since cells replicate and they change each generation, they create basically randomized forms, and selection pressures destroy the forms that don't work. And
your answer is just like your answer a while ago. Can you give me something at least close to empirical evidence?
That is empirical. We observe that. We observe every generation is different from the last.
It is like the
structural design. They're not.
It is like the bacterial flagellum. I think we have heard of that. Evolutionists say proteins, given amount of time, would change their functions and then create this bacterial flagellum. Even the leading theistic evolutionist or Christian evolutionist in the world, Dr. Francis Collins, said evolution, blind evolution, almost cannot explain how this bacterial flagellum evolved. But he has to resort to what I just said about the proteins losing and turning new function in order to create this. So it's a guess. Do you understand, Taylor? If my tone is not friendly, forgive me.
Oh, no, you're fine. I understand why you don't understand. I think because you're not understanding basically how forms are randomized to be put into the selection process.
Taylor, what we don't understand is why you think your imaginary constructs are science.
I don't know why you think your storybook is science.
So tell me how did it learn? Can you give me specific details? Not a generalized detail, a specific detail on how the chaperone protein learned how to fold and unfold the other proteins. Specific details, not just the generalized which you gave. Give me empirical evidence.
You know he can't give that.
No guesses, please.
I don't need to explain it.
Why not? Because it's design, right?
Like I was saying earlier, we could speculate all day.
Speculate, okay. Keyword, speculate.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Naturalism. So we have to force everything to fit into a naturalistic explanation. I understand. I'm a former atheist, former evolutionist. I'm like you, just like you. So it's okay. It's okay. But
If we can speculate all day, but what we do is we speculate with the best proven models.
so in short, you cannot explain how they evolved. Okay. Because they look design. They're evidence of design.
I can
Almost a
explain.
40 to 50% in evolutionary literature, they claim they don't explain or cannot explain because they are evidence of design. They can only be explained by a designer. So evolutionists disguise those evidence of design as something they do not and cannot explain. Yes, I get that.
I can explain how random proteins are created and selected against or for, and that explains how you get new proteins.
Some things can be explained, correct, but they are just guesses, educated guesses.
But we're guessing
Not
using the best models available, and
still a
creationism
guess.
is not a model that has been used to make many predictions, if any.
Oh, there are so many predictions in the creationist literature.
Like what?
Uh,
I have one. I have one that you could test, made
yeah,
by John Sanford. He predicts that that this knowledge will have some benefits for curing diseases. So, inducing mutagenesis in diseases that infect humans as a way to cure diseases. And I say, go for it. Try to cure diseases by mutating them, and
but please,
come back to me and tell me how it goes.
but please do not keep on saying creationists don't make predictions. Okay, it's a very bad for
Well,
you and others.
I just gave you a prediction, so I don't say that. I'm just asking you for something.
Several 15 to 20 minutes ago when we spoke, you said we don't make predictions.
Yeah, I said you don't. Your predictions don't come true. You do make predictions, but they don't come true.
Creationists predicted in the early 1980s that the vast majority of the DNA molecule, which evolutionists have been calling junk for 35 years, would be discovered to be critically important information that is responsible for the creation of a human being. That prediction is been verified. 97% of the DNA molecule is now known to be transcribed as pieces of information and sent off into the cell to do work. They're made into RNA. The evolutionists claimed for 35 years it was junk. Now it's even known some portions of it code for proteins. It's not junk. Some of it is fundamentally necessary for the development of human organs like the placenta and the liver. That's not junk.
Yeah, junk DNA is a term made up by the media who report on science. So I'll read you
it's made up by an evolutionist scientist.
All right.
Yes,
So I'll read you what actual scientists say about this. They say it remains unclear whether or not the bulk of these DNA sequences have an important functional role. So we just say we don't know until we can prove it.
But that's not what they've been saying for 35 years. So,
Taylor, sorry, you were saying?
Sure, some people will take that and run with it and say junk DNA. We don't know what it does, therefore it does nothing. But that's an unscientific position.
That's not what Taylor. That's not the case. Let me make it clear. For 35 years, evolutionist scientists who invented an evolutionist scientist invented the term. Ono, I think it was, invented the term DNA. It's been, and they've been saying for 35 years that it is junk. Not just that they don't know what it does. They've been saying it's junk. It's garbage left over by evolution. That is exactly what they've been saying. So what you said is wrong. You've misrepresented the facts.
And I just want to say it's hilarious too, because P.Z. Myers himself said the genome is mostly dead transcriptionally. The junk is still junk. And Richard Dawkins said it's a remarkable fact that the greater part of the genome might as well not be there for all the difference it makes. Now, it is true that evolutionists did say maybe some of it has some unknown function, but the vast majority of it is still non-functional. I mean, from what I've heard from talking to evolutionary scientists, they'll say maximum 20% functional. So what does that say? They're saying 80% at least is non-functional. based on evolutionary leftovers. Are you denying that, Taylor?
What they're talking about is non-coding.
I know,
Yes.
non-coding DNA, but are you denying the fact that the evolutionists are saying that maximum the non-coding regions are 20% functional? Are you denying that?
They're not saying maximum. They're saying it remains unclear what the bulk of the DNA does. But they're saying that they can only confirm about 20%.
Right, but they've been saying for 35 years that it's junk and has no function.
But the original prediction was that the DNA is idle. That was they were so sure in 2001 that 98 or 99% of the genome is junk. They were so
Well,
sure, and right now they are so sure of a new figure. So how many times are they going to be so sure?
it's regulatory information, so it has a lot more anti-fragility than the non-coding or the coding region of the DNA. So they have performed experiments of knockout genes, and it doesn't affect it as much, but that doesn't prove that it has no function.
Well,
Yes, that's the
exactly right, especially with all the redundancy. But do you know how many gene knockout tests have actually been performed on mammals, for example?
Not nearly enough to cover the genome.
Exactly. So, for one, it's premature for an evolutionist to say that, max 20% of the genome is functional. But the thing is, the evolutionists are not the ones making the prediction that the vast majority of our genome is functional. We are, based on the hypothesis of created genetic diversity, created functional DNA differences. And these pseudogenes that are supposedly genomic fossils, evolutionary leftovers from past common ancestors, we now know that these pseudogenes, these specific genes, they're necessary. They're required to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. There's also areas in the non-coding DNA regions that are extremely important in placental development, embryonic development. So if an evolutionist is going to say that, these functions are based on evolutionary leftovers, genomic fossils, I mean, that's a huge stretch of the imagination. That's more consistent with a model of pre-existing genetic built-in created diversity. I mean, it just seems like a stretch of the imagination to me.
Now, the reason the evolutionists said for 35 years that the majority of the DNA molecule was junk is because it didn't code for proteins. And their belief system was, if it doesn't code for proteins, it has no function. This was the early years of genetic understanding. If it doesn't code for a protein or an RNA, it doesn't have function. They had not observed in the vast majority of the DNA to do either. And so they assumed, well, it's junk, it's garbled, it's attached to the DNA molecule, and natural selection hasn't somehow just deleted all that junk, but it's functionless. And that's why they believed it was functionless, because they had not observed it to code for proteins or RNA. But now, here we are 35 years later, and we know, wow, all kinds of functions being discovered in this information. And critical information that helps develop fetally the liver, the pancreas, the placenta, and other things too. And some of it actually codes for protein, a small percentage of it, and the vast majority of it is codes for RNA. So the scientists in the early 1980s who said, wait a minute, you might call it junk, but science, as it advances, is going to discover that all this DNA that you think is junk is going to actually be discovered to be critically important information that makes a human being. And that prediction was correct. Because now we know 87%, or is it 97% of the DNA, I think it's 87% of the DNA molecule is known to code for RNA. And that number is expected to rise possibly as much as almost, if not 100%. So the creationist prediction, we hear evolutionists all the time say creationism doesn't provide any the scientifically verifiable predictions. That's one. There's one in the Bible where it says creatures will be begat after their kind. That's verified. The fossil record shows us that's exactly what happens. Animal husbandry for the last 5,000 years with mankind breeding all kinds of creatures has shown that's exactly what happens. Creatures beget after their kind, just like the Bible said. That creation prediction is verified. The creationists predicted that random genetic mutations in general would have a negative effect on living things. Evolutionists said that's not true. The creationist prediction has been verified in the last 25, 35 years of genetic studies. So
that's not really a prediction, because all you did there is correctly point out that you shouldn't just assume something has no function just because you can't find it. And that is a correct position, but it's not a prediction. Just saying there could be a function is not a prediction, because you haven't applied.
Well, we never said there could be a function.
No,
there will be a function.
That's right. They said it was a prediction. That's incorrect.
Hey, Standing. Can I discuss what I was going to say about falsifying evolution? Because I think we kind of get off topic and it just with everybody talking. I was going to
I just want to make one. I just want to make one last point there, and then we can move on to that.
Okay.
I think it's pretty clear, and you can correct us. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Taylor. For the evolution model, or for the evolutionists, they're going to predict that not nearly of the genome is functional to the extent that we would predict it's functional, especially because we know so little of the developmental process, and the fact that we're making further predictions on genome-wide functionality and not just regulatory roles, but very important roles like we're seeing in the embryo. And do you know of any evolutionists that are making that bold prediction?
I would say it's a prediction if you can tell us why it's functional. You just randomly flip a coin, but why? What do you mean?
Well, because we know so little of the developmental process, and on a DNA level, on a molecular level, we're just beginning to understand the developmental process, right? How coding and non-coding DNA coordinate with each other in order to build structures and sequentially put them into place to produce the fully functional organism. And the fact that we haven't performed these comprehensive knockout experiments for a mammal, that's pretty good reason to believe that the more we do these studies and the more we do these tests, genome-wide functionality is almost a guarantee. And since our starting point is the fact that God created Adam and Eve and the created kinds with pre-existing functional DNA differences, while the evolutionists will say that these tens of millions of nuclear DNA differences are based on mutation, we're saying they're based on created heterozygosity. So all of that falls into place to make that prediction. So I mean, there's your reasons right there.
Well, I just don't see how that's a prediction, because I can predict someone will someday build a rocket ship and colonize Mars, but that in itself, and it's probably going to happen, and in itself is not a scientific prediction, because I produce no model that explains how I made that guess or why that's a good guess.
Well, I just told you.
May I say something about that? Standing for Truth mentioned the created heterozygosity. The existing created heterozygosity that God put on humans and animals. Okay, since God is a designer, and when you look at today's designer, we create do today's designer create junk? No, right? They create mostly functional whatever they're designing. So since God is also a designer like our engineers today, God would not put junk DNA, would not make our DNA full of junk. So it has to be a lot of functions should be found in DNA than the non-functional ones. So based on the designer argument, we predict that the junk DNA is not junk. So I think Standing did not say this.
God did it is not an explanation, though, because one, you're assuming a God, and two, it doesn't explain why or how he did it.
The thing is, yeah, you could say that that's an ad hoc hypothesis, but the thing is, it's all about the testable and falsifiable predictions that flow from the hypothesis. So based on the hypothesis of created functional DNA differences that we're attributing to these nuclear DNA differences that you say are based on mutation, well, obviously we're going to look to functionality in the genome. And we're making that prediction, that bold prediction, evolutionists or not. Okay. So whether you say that, the genome is going to be more than 20% functional, from what I've heard, the max that they say is 20% functional. We're making a much larger and a much more bold prediction based on our model. So it's not just God did it, quote unquote, because if these predictions come true, which, as Neff already said, ENCODE at least has revealed that over 80% of the genome is transcribed into RNA, that suggests function. That's preliminary data that we're using to make a further prediction that, wow, we're going to study the genome, we're going to do these gene knockout tests at some point, and we're going to discover further functionality, regulatory, expressive roles, placental roles. We're already seeing it, but the more we understand the DNA language, we only understand less than probably 5% of the DNA language. The more we study it, the more important functions we'll see, and that confirms our model and confirms our prediction. And I know for a fact, evolutionists are not making that prediction. That's a prediction made by the creationists and the intelligent design advocates.
And one more thing, the ENCODE project, we think that ENCODE tested a lot. It's true, they tested a lot. But take a look at how many cell types they tested. It's only less than 500 or less than 300, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor. Okay, and there are thousands more cell types in our bodies. Okay, so we predict most of those future discoveries of the cell types to be functional too. And so far, for the cell types that we have tested, they are there are preliminary evidence that they are functional. So the trajectory is towards genome-wide function, because God would not create a junk DNA. A designer would not create a junk car. He would create a fully functional car, just like a God would create a fully functional genome. But as time goes on, genetic entropy, it will degrade, so it won't be 100% DNA function. So it's as simple as that.
That's a good point, Jeremy. Really good point. The designers don't, design junk. It might be. We couldn't expect God to just design junk. Taylor, let me ask you a question. If you find a mechanical, if you find a machine and it has numerous mechanical components like camshafts and stators and switching mechanisms and lock boxes, all operating in unison, that have machine components that spin and operate a camshaft, for example, that an operating camshaft, this kind of thing, you would conclude immediately, wouldn't you, that this was designed by an intelligence. So I would just ask you this. Let me show something to you, and ask you why you wouldn't believe this is designed. Because what you're looking at now, if you can see it on the screen, is inside your cells. This is ATP synthase. It's got a camshaft. It's a chemical electrical machine, and it actually has camshaft. It has bearings and stators. And so why wouldn't this be, if this is mechanical as it is? Look, it's even got a component here, an armature, that holds the whole unit at the bottom in place so it can't vary. And there's the camshaft. You see the camshaft rotating? Well, why would you look at that and believe that's not designed? And this is helicase. This is the machinery that duplicates the DNA molecule. It's a very complex set of mechanical components that operate in unison in a particular pattern. One comes in, locks, releases, spins, and releases. Another component comes in, it locks, it releases and spins. It does this over and over. The DNA molecule that comes out of this thing is spinning at the speed of a jet engine's turbine. This is greatly slowed down for your visual purpose. It's assembling molecules in order as a duplication of a template at a speed that's so great that it would be like throwing tennis balls into golf balls into a jet engine by the thousands per second, and it coming out assembled exactly right at the speed that a jet engine's turbine spins. And it's duplicating one strand of the DNA forward and the other one backwards, and then it assembles them. That's truly amazing. Now what you're seeing on the screen is thousands and thousands during the cell division. The DNA, the chromosomes are getting ready to be split. Thousands and thousands of molecular man-like molecules, they're called kinesin, motor proteins, operating as they walk down a tubule in the cell carrying a payload of energy from one place or information. They have legs with feet, and they walk 1 foot in front of the other. There's thousands upon thousands of them, and they wait till just the right moment before they get together to do this. The cell has to wait. Look, right now the cell has decided it's time. Time to go, guys. And they all get the cell phone call. It's time to go. And then thousands upon thousands of these guys take off. Before that, they were all standing at the starting gate waiting. There's just, okay, I'm waiting for my phone call, waiting. And the cell decides the time is almost there. It's almost ready. Almost, go. And everybody just takes off down the cell, walk down the tubules that connect the chromosomes. And they start walking down this tubule 1 foot in front of another, carrying information from one cell to one part of the cell to another. And they have feet and boots. Here's another one. This is a kinesin molecule. He's walking with 1 foot in front of the other. The complexity of this is amazing. Watch this.
I'm very familiar with these molecules, so unless you're doing this for the audience benefit.
No, for yours. The heel locks in place chemically, and then the rest of the foot comes down and it locks in place. Then when all the molecules have shifted in shape and bent the proteins at the right shape exactly, one of the protein bonds in the back of the foot releases, then the front, just like a person walking. Clickety, clickety, clickety. And each one of these is molecular bonds. Right?
I spent half a semester on these exact molecules, so
this is truly astonishing complexity.
Chemistry. It's chemistry.
But the idea is this, really, Taylor.
Wait, can I say something?
I just want to say one thing real quick. Because I want to give Taylor, he's been really good here, really courteous. I want to give him ample time to respond to anything that might have been said in the last few minutes, including what Neff said about the design, without any interruptions. I think it's just fair that we allow Taylor to give us his thoughts, give us his objections, and then go from there. So Taylor, just take your time and answer Neff's question. And if you have anything lingering in your head about what we said on whether it's junk DNA or predictions, just go ahead, give us your thoughts.
Okay, thanks. Rewinding a little bit, I think you guys are assuming God in your model, and you're assuming a particular God, because the creator could be anything, even if we're assuming a creator. So you're making all these assumptions, and you might even be able to convince me on a couple, like not me personally. Well, I might. I'm open-minded. I'll say that. But I don't personally hold to a alien creationist belief or anything like that. But we can easily assume multiple steps of this. We can assume a creator. That still doesn't get us towards your God. And why would I assume that these mechanisms that Nephilim is showing me are created? As a scientist, we shouldn't assume anything. We should. I don't assume anything, so I don't assume it was created by God. Especially when I know that self-replicating things get more complex and functional over time, and I know this is a self-replicating thing, and its creator will not present itself. With a machine, I can go and see that it has been created, and I can look at the creation process. So that's the difference. They're not very analogous, and yeah.
So if they're all chemistry, explain how they evolve.
I have a few times, since chemistry allows for permutations of different proteins. The self-replication process will create differences between generations. So this will create randomized configurations, and these random sets of configurations will be subject to selection pressures. Some will make it, some will proliferate, some will be removed forever.
Do you know what you just said is just an assumption?
No, we see this.
Yes, we see this, but this doesn't explain the machinery that Neff showed you. It's nothing. It's not even close.
It does explain it. We know that proteins can differentiate over time due to
There's
replication processes and due to selection processes.
There's an integrated complexity there, the irreducible complexity thing.
What we
What do you
actually see is the opposite. Is we have such systems that are anti-fragile. I can link that to you. That you can screw around with them, and that's why we see people with mutations and animals with mutations can adapt to these mutations even if they're deleterious.
So you cannot explain how the transcription evolved. For example, the transcription is just one of the things in the animation.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.